Tonight is November 6th, 2023. This is the 18th episode of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and tonight, as usual, I'll be joined by Joe Meade. Joe, before we get into things, little table of contents here. Just a simple Week 9 recap in college football, and then we're previewing the 3 or 4 biggest games upcoming in the first week of college hoops. Joe, we're going to go to football first, as we usually do. A couple of upsets that we're going to talk about here, but we're going to talk about Ohio State and Rutgers first. The Scarlet Knights led 9-7 at halftime, but Ohio State brought it in the second half. They end up winning 35-16. At this point, do Ohio State just need to work on getting off to a little better starts?
Yeah, Sean, the biggest concern for Ohio State this year has clearly not been wins and losses, just been the lackluster starts. I mean, look at some of these scores. They struggled to pull away from Indiana, but you give them a mulligan. That's the first week of the year. Notre Dame is a solid enough team. I know they lost to Clemson, but frankly, in these games against Penn State and Penn State's a very good team, but at home, you have to start a lot better than that. And falling behind to Rutgers, and really Rutgers could have went up 16-7 in the beginning of the second half. Just an ill-advised throw from Gavin Wimsatt that was returned for a pick six. From there, Ohio State fans could breathe a lot easier. But Sean, their next two games are not going to be challenging. Home to Michigan State, and home against Minnesota. Those are going to be two very easy wins for the Buckeyes. Nothing will lead me to believe otherwise. So in these games, they just need to work on getting. I think I'm pretty shocked that a good play caller like Ryan Day and Brian Hartline haven't scripted a good 15 plays to start a game. Perhaps they're saving some things for the Michigan game, though most football people will tell you you do really run the same things. You run the same sets, maybe just a different variation of them, one or two for the rivalry game. But no, other than that, Ohio State still is the number one team. We're recording this Monday. I bet you that might change with Georgia's win over a top 12 Missouri team.
Yeah, Ohio State, it just seems like they could do their starters a lot of good to, get them out before the fourth quarter starts. Because, this may have been a 19 or 21 point game at points in this game, but they were winning, by just 12 at the end of the third quarter. So the game's not over by then. But it's going to come back to bite them one of these times if they don't put a decent team away, because they're struggling to put these kind of like okay teams away. But next, Joe, we're going to go to some upsets. Certainly none of these I saw coming. We had Indiana beating Wisconsin, Michigan State beating Nebraska, and Illinois beating Minnesota. None of these teams are, the big three, which would get, national upset watch, but certainly I didn't see any of these three coming.
No, Sean, I think the most surprising of them was Illinois going to Minnesota. Brett Bielema has never lost to Minnesota. That's shocking to me. And Illinois, the last two of their last three games, they played really well. They put out a phenomenal performance on the road against Maryland. Were this close to beating Wisconsin at home, lost 25-21. Then after the bye week, came in and really upset Minnesota. And Sean, at the beginning of the day, Iowa's Twitter said it correctly. There were four teams atop the Big Ten West. Then there was one. That leads us to Nebraska. They just played. They were morbid offensively, Sean. There's no other way to put it. Heinrich Haarberg, 12 of 28, two picks. The offensive line, Michigan State has a very good front seven, but the offensive lines played better front sevens than that, like Michigan's and a little, and you could argue Minnesota, but they had nothing going for them. And when they fell down to a 10-point hole, you really just felt like Michigan State in the past, especially the Rutgers game, would blow it. But Michigan State just held firm. Their quarterbacks, for the first time, did enough to not lose the game. They just game managed. Though there was that viral clip of Mark D'Antonio going, "What the F?" after some terrible play calling for State. Regardless, huge credit to Michigan State. That of those two teams, they had significantly less to play for, likely out of a bowl game, but they really performed it on senior day. They brought home a win for interim coach Harlan Barnett. And then to end us off, Sean, Wisconsin, I don't really know what to make of that because they are very injured right now. But losing to Indiana it's probably in the context of the past 3 seasons, losing to Indiana is even worse than losing to Rutgers from the Big Ten East. Um, those are two programs that, you know, they're going in totally opposite directions. Indiana's probably about to fire the coach. Wisconsin just hired a coach, and Indiana just pulled it off. And you look at the Big Ten West now. There's besides the divisional race, which in itself is intriguing. You have a lot of teams fighting for bowl eligibility, with the exception of Purdue, Northwestern at 4-5, Illinois at 4-5, and everyone else at 5-4, with the exception of Iowa at 7-2. There are a bunch of teams right now who probably went from fighting for West Divisional Championship to maybe not even making a bowl game. Looking particularly at Minnesota and Nebraska, but surely a lot could change. Still only a 1 game difference, and Wisconsin, Nebraska play each other, Nebraska, Iowa play each other, and Minnesota, Wisconsin play each other. So we've learned pretty much nothing new about the West, and we're not even going to talk about the Iowa Northwestern game because had I been dumb enough to watch that game, Sean, I don't think anyone should listen to our podcast.
Yeah, it was 10-7 Iowa. That means they go to the top of the Big Ten West at 4-2, like you said, Joe. Minnesota at 3-3. Remember, Minnesota does have the tiebreaker. Wisconsin also at 3-3. Iowa has the tiebreaker over them, so it's essentially a 2-game lead over them. And then, like you said, Iowa, Nebraska yet to be played. So they have 81 points in their 6 conference games and 4 wins. That is pretty remarkable. And that game was played at Wrigley Field. There were many Chicago Cubs games that had more runs than points in that game, and that is not funny. It is funny, but it's really football and baseball go by much different scoring metrics. So they just keep going on, though, and I would say that Iowa's probably going to win the Big Ten West now. They control their own destiny, and if they lose to the correct team, they can still probably lose another game and make it. Not that the Big Ten championship game would be at all interesting or close, but somebody does have to win the Big Ten West. So the last game, Joe, that we're going to talk about from last week was the Michigan Wolverines handling Purdue 41-13 on the Big Ten Saturday night. Michigan was up 17-0 after the first quarter and never really looked back. Blake Corum had 3 touchdowns. It was business as usual for the Wolverines. Purdue does make it the highest defensive amount of points that Michigan has given up this year, but that's really just the only thing to note from this game. Michigan in control, and all eyes are on next week for the Wolverines.
Yeah, Sean, and then we couple that with the Penn State Maryland game. I'm going to be very upfront. I was dead wrong about that. Maryland, the moment they didn't get that 4th-and-1 early, the game just collapsed. Maryland's now lost 4 straight games. It looks like the September Maryland meme is exactly true and not a stereotype. And frankly, the meme is based on a fact because they are just awful following the month of October. With that said, Penn State's offense was very impressive. Michigan, after a bye, kind of looked like they were robotic, and I don't mean that in a good way. They clearly just handled an inferior opponent, and I can tell you that based on the cover, Purdue had the same coverage game. It took until the State and Ohio State during their bye week. Luckily, it did not. The only person who might be injured is Josh Wallace. Still unclear on his status for Saturday, but we'll talk more about the Penn State-Michigan game, the headliner on Big Noon, on our next episode.
So, Joe, that's all the action from the Big Ten in football last week. Like you said, we'll preview Week 10, or Week 11, rather, later this week. We're going to flip the page to basketball. College basketball does start across the country today. We have a number of Big Ten teams in action today. The only really game of note is Princeton and Rutgers going on in Trenton at 7. Most of our listeners will probably be watching after the game, so there's no need to preview it because it's going to already have happened for a lot of our listeners. That game is on Peacock, and that's going to be a little bit of a theme here. The rest of the good games are on Friday. You do have some teams playing Tuesday and Thursday against teams that, they really should be not just beating but handling. We've got the first big game on Friday. Number 15 Texas A&M goes to Value City Arena to play Ohio State. 7 o'clock on Peacock. A really good early test for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, Sean, I think Ohio State's season really started to tailspin when they lost that close game to Purdue at the beginning of January last year. Fletcher Lawyer hit a big three to go ahead late, but this is just a prime opportunity for a young team. It's been almost 8 months since their stint in Indianapolis ended, and pardon me, where was it? It was Chicago, right?
Yep.
Yeah, pardon me, Chicago, and you know they've had 8 months of hearing that their defense is terrible, and without sets of ball they can't do much, and really a lot of people have some faith in Ohio State, but this is a game where they could really affirm that last year was nothing but an outlier. So, don't know way too much about Texas A&M. I did listen to a little of our SEC preview, but I do think Ohio State I actually think Ohio State will probably win this game based on the fact that they are returning a decent amount and then a home game early in the year. This is the best pick off teams that maybe are a little more talented than you, but they're still getting the group thing. So, Sean, what are your thoughts?
It's a really good opportunity for Ohio State to get a good win early in the year. And Texas A&M is, Chuck and I are actually not as high on them as others, but they're still a top 3-4 team in the SEC. They're going to make the tournament, and if things go to plan for them, they're going to be a protected seed. They've got a couple of, a lot of returners. Julius Marble from Michigan State, if you remember him, he's actually suspended right now, so not entirely sure he'll be available for this one, but they're really good. Buzz Williams is an excellent coach. It's a really good opportunity for Ohio State to win, and Texas A&M should be good enough where if you do happen to lose it, it should not really hurt you at all. But good opportunity. Again, Peacock, if you're a Big Ten fan and you want to watch the game, you're going to have to subscribe, and you're going to miss a lot of Big Ten action if you don't this season, because we're going to keep the theme going. Just after it, Joe, is another team, another Big Ten team hosting a top 15 team. That's Wisconsin on Friday at 9 o'clock. They're hosting number 9 Tennessee. I would say pretty much the same thing I said for last game. It's another good opportunity for a big win for the Badgers early on, as somebody who didn't make the tournament last year wanting to make the tournament this year.
Yeah, Sean, and with the experienced guys back, this is another game where I'm going to ignore the preseason rankings, which most analysts ignore anyway. I really like Wisconsin's chances here. I can't even hide it. I know Tennessee's a top 10 team, and I know they did beat Michigan State in that scrimmage. But Wisconsin's a team that, especially from the SEC, you're not going to be used to playing a team like that so early on in the year. Had this been a March Madness or even a late December game, I probably would pick the Volunteers. But, this is a Wisconsin team. It's not going to feel like their second game of the year, Sean. It'll probably feel like their 40th game of the year because all these guys have played in this system. They know how to win games. And frankly, Sean, even if Tennessee wins, I think this will be a very close competitive game. I think Tennessee's going to be taken out of their element, not only because of the road factor, but also because of the experience factor. And playing in the Kohl Center, even for Big Ten teams every other year, is never easy. And I think Tennessee good for them to prep and go to the I-zone, but Wisconsin style play is just so different. I don't know if Tennessee's going to be able to pull off an early one like this.
Yeah, both of these games should be really close. 3-point spreads either way. I think Tennessee's probably going to be favorites, and I think Texas A&M OSU is going to be really close to a pick. But Tennessee's probably the most like any of the Big Ten teams from the SEC. At least they were last year. They threw a lot of bodies in there. They're extremely physical. They played great defense. They did lose their Plavsic, their big guy, so I don't know if they can do that sort of defense again. But it's a great test for Tennessee. They are they're returning a lot of players too, so it's going to be two teams that are very ready for the season compared to really anybody else. And Wisconsin, they narrowly missed out, made the NIT last year. They should make the tournament this year, and a win here really puts them in a good spot come March Madness. Another game, Joe, on Friday, really the only other one of note. Davidson is playing Maryland in the Asheville Championship. Davidson had a had a down year a year ago, but it's still a A10. I don't you can call the Atlantic 10 a power conference or not, but it's still at least a game that you cannot just show up and expect to win.
No, Sean, this is another game where Maryland, all a viewer should really be listening, not listening, should be watching for is if Maryland's big three picked up where they did last year, if they could just run the offense, get into a flow. Um, Davidson is a pro of the programs. I think you put it right up there. Maybe not the tier one of those, but tier two, tier three benefit from this, especially if this game turns out to be a quad one or a quad two win. So, good opportunity for Maryland. Certainly not as good as the other two teams we talked about. But Sean, I'm going to ask you one more game before you get into Davidson, Maryland. Do you think Lehigh Penn State could be any kind?
And Joe, we're losing you a little bit there. You're cutting in and out, but Lehigh and Penn State. Lehigh should be right in the middle of the pack in the Patriot League. Well, we got most of what you said, but I didn't know when you stopped exactly. So, yeah, Lehigh, Penn State. Penn State really, it has to be a win for the Nittany Lions. We talked about how much they're gonna struggle in Big Ten play, but a team in Lehigh that is significantly worse than Colgate, who should come out of the Patriot League. I think maybe you could make something happen there. A new team. It might be close. The spread might be close, but that is a game that if you're Penn State, you just want to be over with, because Lehigh is not some 300 ranked team where you can show up and win by 30. I think they are in the 100s, which is a significant quality difference. All right, so they're 248. So there is a significant quality difference from 250 to 350, but Penn State's got to win it, and I think they will. This game shouldn't be close. Let's see what the analytics have this game at. So they have it at Penn State 9-point win. So it's not going to be some 20, 30-point smoke by Penn State, but it should not. Penn State should be winning that game. But the other two teams in the Asheville Championship are Clemson and UAB. So a potential championship game there is another good opponent for Maryland. UAB was runner-ups in the NIT last year, and Clemson also was near the top of the ACC for most of the year before they fell into the NIT. So there's a chance that all four of those teams could go to the tournament. So they may not be the ranked opponent slaying the dragon of Tennessee and Texas A&M would be, but Maryland's still an opportunity to get a couple really quality wins there. We will be back. I don't think Saturday and Sunday are any games of note, but we will be back next Monday at the very latest to talk about the next week in the Big Ten and to preview the Champions Classic, which includes Michigan State, and then the Gavitt games are next week as well. So it actually starts on Monday. So we'll attack that next week, or maybe in our pod later this week. But Joe, the Big Ten slate, at this point in the year, as a Big Ten fan, I think you have to root for Big Ten teams, because that will only help come NCAA tournament time, and you really don't want a team losing to a team that they should beat, because if you end up losing to them, looks even worse.
Yeah, Sean, I think especially the fact we only previewed 3, 4, 5 games is indicative that this is a week where everyone in the Big Ten needs to win, because I'll give you an example. If Michigan loses like to Central Michigan like last year, a team in the 300s, or an Indiana loses to an FGCU at home, the damage to their their overall ranking in terms of the power ranking, the quads, right? It will be significant. And to lose to a team like that, like losing at Assembly Hall, even when Indiana, for all intents and purposes, could be in a down year, or losing to even to a Purdue, they're clearly not down this year, but 16-16 Purdue team, a 16-16 team is a team you have to take with a lot of context. One is one that maybe lost 10, 11 conference games, all the good opponents, and then five to some pretty decent out of conference. Then there's the 16 and 16 teams that lost to an NJIT or to you know, a terrible mid-major, a mid-major team that wins 10 or 11 games the whole year. So there's no, I mean, besides maybe some memes you'll find on social media, there's really no benefit to your arch rival losing to someone really bad because you're going to have to square up against them likely twice.
And like you said, Joe, Michigan's first game, UNC Asheville, they made the tournament last year. They're 132. Michigan only supposed to win that game by 9. So you got to take care of business in these, and mid majors are as good as they've ever been. And if a 300 team rolls up like Michigan has got Eastern Michigan 307, you could probably show up and have one or two of your players show up and win by a lot. But Michigan has a number of Long Beach States at 114, and those teams are ranked higher than Minnesota, and Minnesota won a couple games last year. So an upset isn't totally out of the realm of possibility, and you do have to win them because it is a season-defining loss if you do take one. Michigan really put themselves in a bad spot come bubble time because of that loss to Central, and it ultimately cost them in the end. But, Joe, we're just under 22 minutes now, so if you want to ask a couple of questions before we wrap it up.
Yeah, Sean. It's kind of funny. The news day during the week for football is normally really nothing but press conference quotes and all that. But the past 3 weeks with this Michigan side stealing incident has been pretty eventful. So that's the first question from our boy Ryan. Ryan asks Joe, do you have the latest update on the University of Michigan side stealing scandal, and what can you? Well, I guess based on what's new today is Michigan was investigated by the NCAA. So far, they found that Jim Harbaugh had no knowledge of this sideline scouting. I'm trying to be very PC here because I don't want to misquote nor mischaracterize an article. Now that does not mean he is not that he is innocent nor that the side stealing didn't happen. One thing I will say is I think this looks a lot better for Michigan this week than it has the past few weeks. Now, this has been an up and down thing where ESPN, and I'm just going to be very transparent with everyone. The reason ESPN is doing all these hit Michigan and overall hit pieces on the Big Ten is because the Big Ten did not renew their contract with them. If you notice, a lot of the games we preview are on Peacock or NBC, Fox, BTN, all not associated with ESPN and ABC. So it's kind of like modern politics where, Fox Sports and every network that covers the Big Ten, they're going to have their guy come out and say, oh, Michigan didn't do anything. And then you'll have, Paul Feinbaum and Pete Thamel going on asking for Michigan to get the electric chair. So, we love sports. Me and Sean do. We love college sports, but we also know that money does drive the sport for better or worse. So that's still reason you're seeing such a discrepancy in reporting. But, let's just get back to the stuff on the court or the field. Sean, this question is for you. After the Tuesday games, so I guess look at Tuesday, Thursday, what team is on the highest upset alert? Not that it'll happen, and that's from our boy Dylan.
Let me take a quick look at the opponents here.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think Rutgers is on upset alert tonight. Obviously, the listeners are going to know the result of that contest by the time that finishes. We've got a lot of 15 to 20 point spreads, so that usually says to me if you play well for a half, you're going to win the game, whether it's the first half or the second half. We've got Mount St. Mary's in Maryland. Mount St. Mary's is not supposed to be that good this year. I know them from the MAC. They've got a couple of good guards, but so does Maryland, so that shouldn't be close. UNC Asheville, they're pretty solid. Drew Pember is a really good player. He's probably the best player in that conference by a mile, and he did score a ridiculous amount of points last year. He's 6'11", too, so he can go get it with anybody. And then Thursday, I'd have to say Michigan, unfortunately, Joe. That is the spread that's the lowest,
Yep.
and I think for good reason because Pember is the type of player that can win you a game, and he did have 30 something in the Big South Championship game last year, and he carried them the to the win, really, and they ended up getting into the NCAA tournament and held their own against whatever two seed they did play. I think they lost by 16 or 18 or something, but I would be shocked if Michigan doesn't win, but that would be the one that I would say right now. Them or Rutgers.
Absolutely. And Sean, we'll end with this question. I'm sure we'll have a lot more come Wednesday after some games. What do you really look for in these early non-conference games where the opponent is not even close to par? And that is from our boy Noah. Thanks again for listening and watching, Noah, and thanks for the question.
I would say to make sure that you get your rotations deep enough to handle a couple injuries. Now, you cannot play 8 players in November. You just can't. You've got to go 10 or 11 deep. And, you may not pull away from teams early that you might want to, but you have to, playing these players who are 9, 10, 11 on the bench in the last 4 minutes when you're up by 26, those are not meaningful minutes. So I would suggest that that's what you should look out for is see if your coach is really trying to get home depth because injuries happen and you can't if you've put your team in a spot to be that fragile where one injury derails the season, that is playing with fire.
Absolutely, Sean. Well, to our listeners, before Sean wraps us up, I hope you do enjoy the first 2 nights of college basketball. We will be back Wednesday. Hopefully, for the Big Ten's sake, we do not have to talk about because we're talking about a game at length. We're going to be talking about someone getting upset, and that's just not good based on tonight's slate. But Sean, how about you wrap us up, and then Wednesday we will be previewing Michigan Penn State. That's the last thing.
So thank you for tuning in. We're going to preview. We should probably preview the Gavitt games too, and
Absolutely.
next week of college football. But until then, thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and check out all the Instagram content if you haven't already.